GIT 500, the research process. Now that we've talked about the kinds of research, we're going to talk about how you do the research from a big picture standpoint. There are basically 3 phases in research. So deciding what to study is phase A, planning how to do the study is phase B, and then doing the study is phase C. So let's just whip through these. Step 1, which is in phase A, is come up with a research problem. What is it that you want to research? What is it that you want to examine or explore? Then that's all you really do in phase A. So you move to phase B. Step 2 is then to decide what your research approach is and how you're going to design the study. And remember, research approach is qualitative, quantitative, or mixed methods. So that's when you would decide which of those approaches that you're going to use and how you would fit that into your study design. Step 3 is to figure out, particularly if you're going to do any quantitative research, you're probably going to want to collect data. But even with qualitative, you collect data. It's just different kind of data. And how are you going to collect that? Are you going to have a survey? Are you going to do interviews? Are you going to use a database that already exists out there somewhere? That's where you decide about that. You plan for it. Step 4 is then selecting a sample, and what we mean by sample is who are the people that you're going to study. You can't study everybody. You have to have a defined group, like all graphic designers living in the state of Arizona. Well, that's probably a lot of people, so you have to select a sample, which is a subgroup, a sub-selection of that larger group. So you would figure out how you were going to, or what group you were going to use as your sample. And then step 5 is you write a research proposal. We'll talk about that more, but research proposals are done regardless of basically who you do the research for, whether you do it for school or you do it for a business or you're trying to get funding from a funding group. You almost always have to write a research proposal saying this is what I plan to do and this is why you should support me. And then step 6, which is now in the conducting the study phase C, is you collect the data, right? You go do those interviews or send out their surveys or go check out that database, whatever it is that you're using. Step 7 is then taking all that information you gathered and displaying that data in effective ways that people will understand what the data means. And then step 8 is the final step, and that is taking everything you've done and everything you've learned and putting it into a study report so that you can share your findings with others. This is the same process in a linear look, so that you can see first you do your research problem, then you do phase 2 where you basically are doing all the planning, and then you do phase 3, which is when you do the actual research. Part of doing research is not just gathering data, or it is gathering data, but it's called a literature review. It is in addition to doing interviews and surveys and that stuff. You can gather data from previously published research. So a literature review is a document or a section of a document. For you, it'll be a chapter that collects key sources on a topic or topics and discusses those sources in a conversation with other sources. That's when you sort of take a bunch of sources and synthesize them together into a cohesive piece of writing. The Purdue OWL site, it's the online writing lab, I think that OWL stands for. This URL here that's displayed will tell you more about a literature review. And if you ever forget about anything that you learn in this class, the OWL site has a tremendous amount of information and kind of can help you remember, oh yeah, I remember that now. Typically, you come up with the research problem at the beginning, an actual where you're going to say, this is my actual problem. But really you don't, because first you need to come up with a general idea what your research problem is going to be. That's your idea. You start with an idea. And then you do a literature review, or what we call a lit review. And then you actually write the official research problem statement. And you do that because you're going to come up with an idea, but you're not going to have it fully formed. And then you need to do some research of other literature, things that came before, that will help you sort of formulate and solidify your research problem idea. In general, literature reviews do a few things. It can provide a theoretical background for you, like what is the theory sort of surrounding the issue that you're looking at. And then it also can build links between what you want to do or find out and prior studies, which is what you want to do. Remember, you're building on that foundation of knowledge bricks before you, and you're going to put it on top. So you need to include those bricks below. Those are the prior studies. In your study, and it also shows you how your study fits into the existing knowledge. And that's done through those links. In your study, it brings clarity and focus to your research problem, so it's not vague and sort of floating out there in outer space. It will improve your methodology, and by methodology we mean how you do your study. And it will broaden your own personal knowledge, which will help you do better research. There are two terms when we talk about literature reviews. You might hear literature review, and then you might also hear summary of literature. They're different things. A literature review is the action. It's what you do. You review the literature. You're physically looking at them. You go through and look at the existing literature about your main topics as well as any related subtopics. A summary literature is what you write, and that is a chapter you will write in any research proposal and report paper. And that's just once you've collected all that relevant literature, you then write it down in a summary that synthesizes important findings in the things you write or things you find. This is done in a way that you're not just reporting this article said this book chapter said that. You're talking about topics and weaving in what you read from all the different sources that you found on that topic. How you do a literature review is you search for any existing literature in your main area study. You review those that you have found, and you take notes, you highlight, you do whatever you do, and then from there you're going to develop a framework. What is your whole study going to be about? The first step in a literature review is to search for sources. So actually, once you've known what topic and topic areas you want, or at least the broad question, you'll start with that broad area or question that you'd want answered, and look for sources related to that topic. You might also think about who is your study of population going to be, your sample. That is the people or the subject that you'll be studying, right? So if you want to know, what graphic designers think about designing for good purposes, that's designing for good as a topic out there right now. Your population would be graphic designers, and you would want to narrow that down, but in general, that's where you could start. And then once you start gathering those sources, make yourself a bibliography for this broad area that you've looked at. The broad area is your main topic. And a bibliography is just a list of the sources, including, where you found it, where it was published, who the author was, and when it was published. When writing or doing a literature review, you need to search for sources about the information you need. So there are lots of different places where you can search. You can look in books, either in any kind of libraries, online books also. Google Scholar is a great source, and if you can't find Google Scholar on the internet, just Google Scholar, and it has lots of online books. It also has journals, and journals are articles, shorter articles that are published or written by academic researchers, sometimes industry experts, and you can get those through the ASU library website, which by the way is lib.asu.edu, or other online journals. You'll find them other places, but if you can't access them, try it through the ASU library website once you've logged in, and you should be able to get to it. There's lots of electronic databases outside of that as well. Conference papers where people have gone and spoke. They've also written a paper that they presented. Those are really good sources, and those are typically on conference websites, although they do show up as journal articles for some conferences. And then the internet. Of course, the internet's a good source, but you have to make sure that the information that you're quoting or you're using is reliable. So you need to be careful about those kind of sites. You can use search engines to find both academic and popular industry sources. One word to the wise, Wikipedia is not a reliable source. So don't ever quote anything directly that you learn from Wikipedia. Don't cite anything with Wikipedia. But in Wikipedia websites, if you scroll down to the bottom, if they're good, well-written articles on Wikipedia, they will have sources at the bottom. You can go to those sources, which are usually, if it's done right, actual articles, academic articles, industry articles, that you can then use as sources. When you are reviewing literature, you need to make sure that you read critically, be looking for information that is important to your topic. You need to start looking for themes and issues that keep showing up that might be important to your study and might help direct the direction of your study. It's a good idea to write down the themes, list the themes, and then under those themes, list the findings, like the little bits of information and sources where you got those little bits of information to things that relate to each of those themes. That will help you start to see a path for your literature review and your study overall. When you go to develop a framework, you might want to know what a framework is. Well, it is a way to approach what you are doing. It's a way to frame the study. And you do that by first identifying what the problem is that you want to research, defining that study's purpose. Why are you doing the study? What is it going to do? Is it going to discover something about a situation? Is it going to test a hypothesis that you might have about that situation? That is the study's purpose. And then you need to describe the study's significance. So when someone comes up to you and says, "Oh, about your study, so what? What makes it important? What makes it special?" You can say things like, for instance, "This study helps graphic designers design more accessible websites." That's important. That's the so what, as an example. There are different types of frameworks There's one based on theory, right? So it's theories established in prior research. And this is used a lot in quantitative studies. And so typically when we're talking about a theoretical framework, it's a quantitative study. But then we have conceptual framework. It's based on various concepts, which could include theories, but would also bring in qualitative information. So this, typically what we do in GIT are conceptual framework studies. Which comes first? Reviewing the literature or forming a framework? It's a chicken and egg situation. You're going to start with the review of literature, and then you'll be able to form a framework based on that literature, but you're also probably going to be going back and forth. You're going to do a review of the literature, and then you're going to work on the framework, and then you're probably going to do more reviewing of literature, and you'll go back and forth until you find the right framework for your study. In this presentation, we talked about the 3 phases of research, how to do literature reviews, and developing a study framework.